I'm a political scientist, but I'm also an activist. I'm a member of the Socialist Action Group in Romania. And I go to academic conferences a lot. And it's very alienating experience, very frustrating. You hit a wall all the time whenever you try to present a different perspective on the things that are happening in the world. So to be here among comrades is very fulfilling, it's very gratifying. So I'm really grateful for the invitation. This presentation today is part of a broader research agenda that I'm conducting at the moment, where I'm looking at different far-right populist parties in Europe and try to see to which fractions of the capitalist class they are connected. But more broadly, what are the social blocks behind these far-right populist parties? I don't think we know enough about this. And my general hypothesis that I will try to test, my proposition for you today, is that it depends on the location of the country in the capitalist system. In more peripheral countries like Romania, as you will see in the next slides, it is the party of the domestic bourgeoisie that has felt squeezed out by foreign capital, which has become dominant in most key sectors of the economy since the accession to the European Union and the integration of Romania in global markets. And it's the reaction of this national bourgeoisie that wants to capture state power against the domination of foreign capital. This is not necessarily the same in the UK, where I live, a country of the core of the capitalist system, or at least used to be. There, it's sections of finance capital, sections of fossil fuel capital, very transnational sections of capital that are driving the rise of the Reform UK party. So I think we need a more granulated approach to this party family and see what variation exists, because there are many contradictions between these parties, but also within these parties. Within the social blocks of these parties, we have strong contradictions, and we can see in the United States with the contradictions within the Trumpist power bloc coming to surface. So, you might have seen that Romania had presidential elections, not once but twice in the last 6 months. In November 24, the first round of the elections was won by Călin Georgescu, an independent far-right candidate with 20% of the vote. The elections then, in the second round, he was supposed to run against a neoliberal candidate. On the day of the elections, they were cancelled. The Constitutional Court decided to cancel the whole first round, reorganize the elections in May, and bar Georgescu from standing again in the elections. Very legalist maneuvering against the candidate of, what he was considered a candidate of Moscow. The guy who replaced him, George Simion, who's the leader of AUR, which is the party that I will be focusing on today, AUR, he stood in his place and got double the percentage that Georgescu got, which shows us that this kind of constitutional legalist maneuvers against the far right don't work. They backfire. They only fuel the anti-status quo and anti-establishment aura of the far right. We will see with Le Pen in France, with Trump, similar process. So Simion won the first round of the elections in May, 40%. He looked like he would win the second round, but in the second round, there was a higher turnout, and the neoliberal candidate, Nicușor Dan, won the elections. This is the approximate background for the political situation in Romania, but the bigger background, to understand what's happening in Romania and to understand the spectacular rise of the far right, we need to go back to 1990, to the first years of capitalist restoration in Romania. We had a shock therapy that saw the loss of 1.7 million jobs in the industry, a dramatic decline in exports. Only in the first 2 years of capitalist restoration, 74% drop in exports. Only in the first 2 years, the GDP fell from 49 billion to 15 billion by 1992. Public spending dropped from 36% of the GDP in 1989 to 13% in 2005. massive depopulation, especially of the small industrial, mono-industrial towns, became ghost towns, many of them. Only the old people and the children are still living there because the grown-ups, the working population has gone to the West. We have the largest economic diaspora in Europe of roughly 5 million people. After Romania's accession to the European Union in 2007, so roughly 20 years ago, we've had a revival, a partial and uneven re-industrialization of the country, led by foreign capital investment, particularly in sectors like the automotive sector, Dacia, which is owned by Renault, Ford operates in Romania. We are the 6th largest producer of cars in Europe. The IT sector, Romania is actually the 3rd largest export of software in the world after China and India. But all this is owned by foreign capital. The top 3 investors in Romania, talking about neo-colonial relations, are Germany, Austria, and France, in that order, exactly the same 3 top investors in Romania 100 years ago, before socialism, exact the same countries. Talking of path dependency, right? And the perpetuation of neo-colonial relations. Huge regional inequalities, bigger than you see in Italy or in Spain or in any other European country. Bucharest, it's an island of wealth. It has 144% GDP of the EU average GDP. And a country like a region like the Northeast region, Moldova, which is next to the border, on the border with the Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, has 39% of the EU average GDP per capita. Also, the foreign investment is highly imbalanced. Bucharest gets 60% of the FDI, and the Northeast region I just mentioned gets 0.1%. Not even 1%, 0.1% of the FDI. And they are also the biggest region in terms of out-migration because of that. So these last 20 years, we've seen a very entrenched, consolidated domination of foreign capital in key sectors of the economy, manufacturing, energy, banking. Foreign banks own 60% of the banking sector in Romania, which affects the rest of the economy as well because they don't give advantageous loans to Romanian businesses, which is one of the main contentious points of the far-right, our party. It's one of their key pledges to force foreign banks to give advantageous loans to Romanian businesses, to small and medium enterprises in particular. For example, the most successful companies, biggest companies in Romania by turnover last year, out of the 50, top 50, 35 were foreign-owned. They benefit from low wage economy, they benefit from low regulations, they benefit from a very low corporate tax of 16%, it's the 3rd lowest in the European Union. But even with this low corporate tax, they don't pay it. They don't declare their real profits in Romania. So OMV, which is this energy giant, is the biggest employer in Romania, the biggest company, pays much more tax in its own country, in Austria, than it pays in Romania. The few remaining strongholds of domestic capital, and this is very important, this is crucial to understand the class character of the far right in Romania, but I would say not just in Romania, maybe in other Eastern European countries too, is the real estate, the construction sector, and the food industry and the hospitality industry. Now, to look at the situation of the popular classes in terms of their living standards. I won't dwell too much on it, but after 20 years of EU membership, we still have half of the population that lives in poverty or on the verge of poverty. Our minimum wage is 1/3 of the average minimum wage in the European Union. Despite successive increases in the minimum wage over the past decade, it still falls short of the actual living wage that a person in Romania should be earning in order to have a decent living standard. We have the 2nd lowest public spending as share of the GDP in the European Union after Ireland, which, you know, it's a peculiar case, we can't really compare. Again, huge regional inequalities and massive economic migration. This is a graph that sums up everything I've just said in a quite forceful way, I think. This is the income inequality in Romania between the top 10% and the bottom 50%. So top 10% and half of the population. In 1989, they owned the same share, equal shares of the national income. Still, it was unequal because 10% owned as much as 50%, right? But since 1989, look at the discrepancy. Today in 2020, this is the latest data I could find, World Inequality Database, very useful tool. In 2020, the top 10% owned 40% of the national income, and the bottom 50% owned 10% of the national income. Why is this the case? Because all the mainstream parties in Romania, since 1989, all the parliamentary parties, are the parties of capital, of different fractions of capital. The so-called Social Democratic Party, which is very right-wing, both fiscally and economically and culturally, socially, is very right-wing even by the standards of European social democracy. Even in the bourgeoisified European social democracy, this party is very to the right of that party family. They tend to represent this nexus between bureaucratic networks at national, regional, local level and domestic capitalists that are basically connected to the state resources. They live off state contracts. They live off state resources, public resources. The National Liberal Party, PNL, the historical party of the right in Romania, is a traditional vehicle of foreign capital and the comprador bourgeoisie in Romania. Then the third party, a neoliberal party founded 10 years ago, USR, also the party of transnational capital and the professional managerial classes in the big urban centers. They tend to win the vote in Bucharest, in Cluj, Timișoara, Iași, and so on. But, of course, there's huge popular anger against this political elite, huge mass disillusionment. The turnout in the last parliamentary elections in 2024 was around 50%, 52%. So half of the population didn't even go to vote. So in the absence of a left workers' party, it means that the main vehicle that will capitalize on this mass anger with the status quo will be the far-right party, as we see all across Europe and beyond. And this far-right party is called AUR. It stands for the Alliance for the Union of Romanians. It was founded in 2019, is led by this so-called charismatic leader. I don't know who thinks he's charismatic, but he's portrayed like this by the liberal media. He's a former football ultras. He made his name in the civil society by campaigning aggressively for the reunification between Romania and the Republic of Moldova. This is the obsession, the wet dream of the Romanian fascists for many decades. Nobody wants in Moldova to reunify with Romania, and not many in Romania want to reunify with Moldova. But this is the mantra of the far right in Romania. Hence the name, the Union of Romanians. Aur also means gold in Romanian. So there was a joke after the last presidential elections that they should change, because Simeon lost, they should change the name to silver. But they've had a sharp electoral rise that is likely to continue. In the first elections they stood, 1 year after they were created, they got 9% of the vote. Last year they got 18% of the vote. They doubled. They are the main opposition party. They are the second party in parliament, and they will be the official opposition, because the three parties I mentioned earlier, they agreed on a government coalition, a national unity government, to keep the far right away from power, but who are intending to implement brutal austerity in order to address the public deficit of 10%. Even the IMF said that Romania should consider progressive taxation. Romania and Hungary are the only countries in the European Union that don't have progressive taxation. We've had a flat income tax of 10% since 2005. And you see the outcome of that, the huge inequalities and the huge share of the population that lives in precarious conditions. The government doesn't consider that. They want to go on with austerity, which only will fuel the popular support for the far right. Ideologically, they tick all the boxes of the European far right today, with the addition of Christian Orthodoxism, which is a specific characteristic of Romanian fascism from going back to the interwar era. They are anti-globalist, Eurosceptic, sovereignist, and so on. Geopolitically, despite what the liberal media says, they are much more aligned with Trump than with Putin. Simeon agrees with Trump on every geopolitical issue, from the genocide in Gaza to the war in Ukraine to increasing public spending for NATO and so on and so forth. But importantly, they are a very pro-business party. And this is their economic agenda, most of which is pretty standard neoliberal demands. Cut the income tax, which is already 10%. So they want to cut the 10% flat income tax even more. Downsize the public sector. They want to eliminate 500,000 jobs in the public sector. But they also have some non-neoliberal measures, some protectionist measures for domestic capital. As I said earlier, they want to make banks give advantageous loans to SMEs. They want to regain state control, not full control, majority control over natural resources, 51%, which indicates that those natural resources would still be used in a logic of profit maximization. They wouldn't be used to serve the needs of society. So it's a very much capitalist party, pro-capitalist party, that combines elements of neoliberalism with elements of economic nationalism, or state capitalism, if you want. They want to give tax facilities to farmers, the construction sector, which, as you will see in a second, are the very core of the social base of this party. This is a quote from the electoral program of Călin Georgescu, the guy, the initial far-right candidate that won in November, and then he was taken out of the race. He works closely with Simeon, he calls him his younger protege, and so on. And you can see his program is what I call the petty bourgeois utopia. In Romania, there won't be no workers, there won't be no big capitalists, everybody will be a small producer. Everybody will be an entrepreneur, a little farmer, cultivating their piece of land. Which is, as we know, this kind of petty bourgeois component is a historical characteristic of the far right. But it's not the petty bourgeoisie that is at the top of the power block of the far right, of our. It's these guys. Fractions of domestic capital from construction, real estate, hospitality. Sometimes these people have businesses in all these three sectors because they feed upon each other. They are interrelated. Real estate with constructions, with restaurant, cafe industry, hotel industry, and so on. This guy is one of the main donors to the party. He used to be linked to the mainstream right-wing party in Romania, in Cluj, but the mayor there, whose social base is around the professional managerial classes that I mentioned earlier. Cluj is the second city of Romania. IT sector is very strong. The urban middle class is very, very politically influential there. That mayor serves that urban middle class who wants parks and bicycle lanes. So the mayor expropriated this guy who wanted to use the private land to build more real estate. The mayor took the land to build a park. So these guys say, you will see, I will leave you and I will go and back the far-right party. So they seem like petty kind of rivalries, but they are rooted in the material interests of these capitalists. Mohammad Murad, he's also an entrepreneur, a millionaire, from the real estate, construction, and hospitality sectors. He's not just a supporter, he's an MP for our, he's one of their top leaders. He's also the head of the organization of business people inside the party. The party has its own organization of entrepreneurs. And I think this quote sums up the class character of our. The country is not living a genuine capitalism because the state exerts pressure on domestic capital, persecuting Romanian entrepreneurs to facilitate the entry of big foreign corporations. And I think this is the story of the far right in Romania, in Hungary, correct me if I'm wrong, also in Poland. This is another top figure in the party. He's seen as the number 2 in the party after Simeon, the vice president, the banker of the party who brings in funds. He's an entrepreneur himself in the same sectors that I mentioned earlier. Then we have a second section of the social bloc of the far right, what I would call the disillusioned compradors, who used to serve foreign capital for many years, and the political institutions that represent foreign capital. Călin Georgescu himself, he worked for United Nations in various capacities. He was very embedded in this kind of transnational power circles, until he moved away from them. His wife, who is very politically active, she was the head of the Citibank, which is one of the largest banks in the world, the head of the Citibank subsidiary in Romania, until she got laid off during the financial crisis, and she reinvented herself as a small entrepreneur. This is the same story as in Poland, where the so-called comprador bankers, Polish heads of foreign bank subsidiaries in Poland, after a number of years, they realized that the foreign banks have no interest in stimulating Polish economy. They would not give advantageous loans to Polish businesses, so they rebelled and they backed the political project of law and justice. Under this class, we have the precarious petty bourgeoisie, which is very diversified and very complex to understand, I think, because of the diaspora and the migration component. SMEs are in deep crisis. After the pandemic, after the energy crisis, they've been closing down in their tens of thousands every year since then. There was a record, this year there's a record, 160,000 SMEs are in difficulty. This means they filed for bankruptcy, or they are in insolvency and so on, or they suspended their activity. The farmers, traditional section of the petty bourgeoisie, we have the largest share of the workforce that works in agriculture in the whole of Europe, 20%. This is huge for a developing European country. The second country, just to give you an idea, the second country in terms of the share of the workforce in agriculture is Poland with 10%, and France, which is arguably the big agricultural power of the European Union, France has 2.4% of the workforce in agriculture because they've mechanized their agriculture. We've had the mechanized agriculture before '89, but it's been dismantled. So 20%, these farmers are precarious farmers, small holding farmers, who almost do subsistence farming. And they've been massively impacted by the war in Ukraine because the European Union lifted any trade restrictions on agricultural products coming from Ukraine, which is why Hungary and Slovakia imposed unilateral bans on Ukrainian products. Romania hasn't, which is why the farmers are very angry, and they are backing the far-right hour, which promises them that they would impose similar restrictions. Then we have a plethora of lumper capitalists. They are not significant, but they are there. And then the diaspora. Diaspora is a very interesting phenomenon. It's not a diaspora, it's diasporas. And one of these diasporas, it's a complex example of a dual class condition. We have migrants who go to Germany, Italy, Spain, Britain, France, around 5 million people. Many of them work blue-collar, low-paid, precarious jobs. They are proletarian in the West, but this allows them to accumulate a little bit of capital to go back home and open a small business. Open a cafe, a guest house, a shop, a corner shop, a little farm. So they are proletarian abroad and petty bourgeois at home. And this kind of schizophrenic class condition leads them into a very reactionary direction. Because of the absence of a left party to appeal to them, they go to the far right, because the far right tells them, we will make Romania great again, we will make Romania a proud country in Europe so you can come back home and raise your families at home. They are also very frustrated by the state, who taxes them more than they tax foreign companies. Ours says, we will tax foreign companies and we'll give you tax facilities. They are angry at those below them, because this is the petty bourgeoisie political orientation. They are angry at those above, but also angry at those below them. The undeserving poor, the lazy. I mean, they say, I went abroad and worked so hard, and then I come home and these people don't want to work for me. More than that, the state increased the minimum wage, which they have to pay, and they feel it's a burden for them. So they have a very anti-statist, anti-worker kind of mentality. They are the people who keep Romanian economy alive, and they feel neglected. They feel that no party represents them. So they are going towards this far-right political project. This is again Georgescu, who is influential. He himself is not part of our, but he's influential over our ideological direction. He's a political entrepreneur, if you want. This is a quote about him raising the flag about the precarity of Romanian small businesses. And then we have, at the bottom of our social bloc, the left behind now, the losers of globalization, but the bottom losers of globalization. Because I think this is what we need to specify, that there are different types of losers of globalization. We have elite losers of globalization, like these domestic bourgeoisies who feel squeezed out by foreign capital and by the processes of globalization and neoliberalization. But of course, we have the ex-industrial workers, the people who left the country, and them and their children who left the country to work abroad, who vote for this party. Most of the precarious popular classes in Romania don't vote at all. The highest abstention in elections is amongst this social class. But nevertheless, there's a rising vote for our, which again has nothing to offer to these people. Nothing to offer in terms of increasing the wages, nothing to offer in terms of strengthening workers' rights, strengthening trade unions. Trade unions are very incapacitated in Romania, very low unionization rate in the private sector because of a neoliberal labor law from 2011 that basically wiped out the right to collective bargaining, virtually made impossible to even create a trade union in the private sector, set the threshold for minimum support for a trade union very high, which virtually impossible to meet. So our has nothing to say about that, nothing to say about progressive taxation. They had one top flagship policy aimed at the popular classes, which was to build 1 million affordable homes for 35,000 euros each. It was very popular. A lot of people started to support them on the basis of that one flagship policy. However, between the two rounds of elections in May now, Simeon candidly admitted in an interview that it's not true, it's marketing. He said it because that's how we gain votes. He was talking to a press journalist in live. It wasn't behind back doors, you know, somebody heard. He was saying that in an interview, that it was marketing, which is quite remarkable, to probably the first politician in history to break an electoral pledge before the elections are over. So, which affected his support, might have contributed to why he lost in the second round. To finish, what is to be done? We always have to finish on this. The objective conditions in Romania for a mass workers' party, which is the only way we can stop the rise of the far right, which is the only alternative to both the neoliberal right and the far right, the objective conditions are ripe. After 35 years of unhinged neoliberal capitalism, they are ripe. You saw the data I presented earlier. But also the subjective conditions are catching up with that. There's a sharp rise in class consciousness. It's not even, it's not uniformous, it's not an anti-capitalist consciousness, of course, but there's increasing popular support for basic left-wing policies. More than 90% want the state to create jobs. 80% want state investment in public services and to programs to reduce poverty, which, as you saw, 45% of people live in poverty or on the verge of poverty. 73% think the state should care more about workers than about bosses. And yet, this party is failing to emerge. We have several small socialist and communist groups that are extra-parliamentary. They don't work with each other. They don't talk to each other. There are social movements in housing, environment, now against the genocide in Gaza. Again, there's a failure to converge. The trade unions are captured by very ossified bureaucratic leaders who have been at the leadership of trade unions since 1990. The two main trade unions have the same leader for the past 35 years. But there is an opening amongst the rank and file of these trade unions, amongst precarious workers that are trying to organize themselves despite all the institutional legal obstacles to their trade unionization. And these forces have to come together. have to come together. We need a party. I agree with what was said yesterday. I agree with the need to rebuild our culture. I agree with what Clara Matei said, to build solidarity networks. But fundamentally, we need a party. We need a workers' party of our own that represents us and our class and our interests. A party that can aim concretely at the biggest issues in Romanian society: housing, wages, education, precarious job contract precariousness, but also bridge towards a courageous, radical program for socialist transformation of society. Thank you.